The fluorescent lights in the engineering department hummed their familiar tune as I reviewed the quarterly innovation reports for what I didn't yet know would be the last time. 12 years at Meridian Technologies had taught me to read between the lines of corporate speak, but nothing had prepared me for what was about to unfold in Harold Blackstone's corner office. My name is David Chen, and at 42, I had spent more than a decade transforming Meridian Technologies from a struggling mid-tier manufacturer into a leader in industrial automation. The patents I'd developed for robotic assembly systems had generated over $60 million in revenue for the company. Every major client knew my work, even if they didn't know my name. The email had arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. David, please see me first thing tomorrow morning regarding the Director of Innovation position. H. Blackstone, CO. I'd been expecting this conversation for months. The previous director had retired in January, and I'd been handling the role unofficially ever since, managing a team of 8 engineers and overseeing our most critical projects. That evening I'd stayed late in my lab fine-tuning the prototype for what would become patent application #US 20240157892, an adaptive learning system for manufacturing robots that could revolutionize the entire industry. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was perfecting technology that would soon slip through Harold's fingers like sand. Harold Blackstone had built Meridian Technologies from his father's small machine shop, and he never let anyone forget it. At 68, he still commanded the executive floor with the authority of someone who'd fought for every dollar. His office reflected his personality: dark wood paneling, leather-bound books he'd never read, and photographs of himself shaking hands with politicians and industry leaders. I knocked on his door at exactly 9 a.m., carrying a folder containing my latest project summaries and budget proposals. Harold looked up from his computer, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. David, come in, sit down. His tone was cordial but lacking the warmth I'd grown accustomed to during our monthly strategy meetings. I wanted to discuss the director position with you. I settled into one of the burgundy leather chairs facing his desk, noting the way Harold's fingers drummed against his coffee mug, a tell I'd observed during particularly stressful board meetings. I've been thinking about this role extensively, Harold continued, his eyes fixed on something behind my shoulder rather than meeting my gaze. The Director of Innovation position requires someone who understands not just the technical aspects, but the broader business implications of our work. I agree completely, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Over the past 11 months managing the department, we've increased patent applications by 40% and reduced development costs by 18%. The adaptive learning project alone could generate over $100 million in licensing revenue. Harold's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Yes, your technical contributions have been adequate. However, I've decided to approach this from a different angle. The word adequate hit like a physical blow. Adequate. 12 years of 60-hour weeks, of solving problems that had stumped entire teams, of single-handedly securing contracts that kept the company afloat during the recession, and he called it adequate. I'm promoting Kevin to Director of Innovation, Harold announced, finally meeting my eyes. My nephew has fresh perspectives and an MBA from Wharton. He understands the strategic vision needed to take this department to the next level. Kevin Blackstone. 28 years old, 2 years out of business school, 0 engineering experience. I'd watched him fumble through basic technical concepts during department meetings, seen him take credit for solutions that junior engineers had developed. The kid couldn't distinguish between a servo motor and a stepper motor, yet Harold was handing him control of our most critical innovations. Harold, I said carefully, Kevin is certainly enthusiastic, but he lacks the technical background to dash. Family first, David. Harold's voice carried a finality that cut through any further discussion. Kevin needs this opportunity, and frankly, the board prefers leadership with formal business training. Your role as senior engineer will remain unchanged, of course. Kevin will rely heavily on your expertise. The dismissal was complete. 12 years of loyalty, of building Harold's vision, of making him millions, and I was being demoted to supporting his unqualified nephew. The blood rushed to my face, but I kept my expression neutral. I see, I said quietly. When does Kevin start? Monday. I trust you'll help him transition smoothly. Harold's tone suggested this wasn't really a question. I stood up, extending my hand across his desk. Congratulations to Kevin. I'm sure he'll do interesting things with the position. Harold shook my hand, relief evident in his posture. He'd expected pushback, arguments, perhaps even threats. Instead, he got gracious acceptance. What he didn't understand was that some battles are won through retreat, not confrontation. That afternoon, I called my patent attorney, Jennifer Walsh, whom I'd worked with for 8 years on various personal projects. David, good to hear from you. Jennifer's voice carried the efficiency of someone who billed by the 6-minute increment. What can I do for you? I need to know the status of all patent applications filed under my name personally, not through Meridian. Boss. That's quite a list. Are we talking about the 17 applications from the past 3 years? 17. Even I had lost count. Every breakthrough I'd achieved at Meridian, I'd also refined and improved on my own time, using my own resources, filing patents that were similar but distinctly different from the company's versions. Better actually. All of them. I need to know which ones are ready for activation. David, is everything all right? You sound different. I looked around my office at the awards on the wall, the photos of successful product launches, the coffee mug Kevin would probably be using by next week. Everything's about to be perfect, Jennifer. How soon can we schedule a meeting? The next few days passed in a surreal haze. Harold announced Kevin's promotion during the weekly all-hands meeting, praising his nephew's vision and leadership potential. Kevin stood beside him, beaming with unearned confidence, already talking about synergistic optimization and paradigm shifts, business school buzzwords that made the actual engineers exchange glances. I maintained my professional demeanor, answered Kevin's increasingly basic questions, and quietly began documenting every proprietary process and innovation that Meridian relied on. Most people assumed I was being helpful. I was actually conducting an inventory. During lunch on Thursday, my colleague Janet Morrison approached my table in the company cafeteria. Janet had been with Meridian for 9 years, leading our quality assurance department with the kind of methodical precision that prevented disasters. David, can I speak freely? She glanced around to ensure no one was listening. Always. This Kevin situation, it's insane. Half the engineers are talking about updating their resumes. Marcus already has interviews lined up. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. What are you going to do? I took a sip of my coffee, considering my words carefully. I'm going to do what's best for my career. Which is? Sometimes the best thing you can do is get out of the way and let people reveal their true capabilities. Janet studied my face, trying to read between the lines. You're planning something. I'm planning to make some changes, yes. But not the kind Harold expects. That Friday afternoon, Kevin called his first department meeting. The conference room felt smaller somehow, despite being the same space where I'd led similar meetings for nearly a year. Kevin sat at the head of the table, a stack of business journals beside his laptop, looking every inch the executive he believed himself to be. I wanted to discuss my vision for transforming this department, Kevin began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd given presentations in business school. We need to think beyond incremental improvements and focus on disruptive innovation. Marcus Chen, one of our senior robotics engineers, shifted uncomfortably. Kevin, the adaptive learning project David's been developing could be exactly that kind of disruption. The preliminary results show dash. I've reviewed David's work, Kevin interrupted, not bothering to look at me. It's solid foundation-level research, but it lacks commercial viability. We need solutions that can generate immediate revenue streams. I bit back a laugh. The adaptive learning system represented 2 years of intensive development, solving problems that had stumped MIT's robotics department. Kevin had apparently reviewed it in the 3 days since his promotion. What specific changes are you proposing? Asked Lisa Park, our lead systems architect. Kevin clicked through a PowerPoint presentation that looked remarkably similar to a generic strategy template. First, we'll pivot toward AI integration across all platforms. Second, we'll explore blockchain applications for manufacturing transparency. Third, we'll develop a customer-centric approach to innovation rather than engineer-driven development. The room fell silent. Blockchain applications for manufacturing. AI integration without understanding the underlying systems. Customer-centric innovation that ignored the 12 years of customer relationships I'd built. Kevin, I said quietly, The customers we've surveyed consistently request improvements to reliability and precision. The adaptive learning system addresses exactly those needs. David, I appreciate your input, but we need to think bigger. Customers don't always know what they need until we show them. Kevin's smile was patronizing, the expression of someone who'd learned about innovation from textbooks rather than experience. After the meeting, I returned to my office and opened my secure laptop. The email to Jennifer Walsh was brief. Activate all applications. Begin patent portfolio presentation for potential licensing partners. Timeline, immediate. Her response came within an hour. David, are you sure about this? Once we activate, there's no going back. I stared at the screen for a long moment, thinking about Harold's dismissive shrug, Kevin's arrogant assumption that he could improve on a decade of specialized work, the way my contributions had been minimized to adequate. I'm sure. Let's proceed. That evening I stayed late in my office, not to work on company projects, but to finalize my resignation letter. The document was simple, professional, and gave the required 2 weeks' notice. What it didn't mention was that those 2 weeks would be enough time for my patent applications to process and for several major manufacturing companies to review my independent portfolio. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of spring day that makes everything feel possible. I arrived at the office an hour early, printing copies of my resignation letter and boxing up my personal items. The awards and photos went into a small cardboard box, leaving behind only the company-issued equipment and the projects that Harold believed he owned. At exactly 9 a.m. I knocked on Harold's office door. David, come in. How are you adjusting to the new structure? Harold's tone was cheerful, perhaps relieved that the transition had gone smoothly. Actually, Harold, I wanted to discuss my future with the company. I handed him the resignation letter, watching his expression shift from casual interest to concern. He read quickly, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. David, this is unexpected. Is this about Kevin's promotion? Because I thought we discussed dash. This is about my career trajectory, I replied evenly. After 12 years, I feel it's time to explore new opportunities. Harold set the letter down, leaning back in his chair. What kind of opportunities? Because if this is about salary, we can certainly negotiate dash. It's not about money, Harold. It's about recognition. About working somewhere my contributions are valued appropriately. Your contributions are valued here. You're one of our most important engineers. I almost smiled at that. Important enough to develop the technology that generated $60 million in revenue, but not important enough to lead the department I'd been managing for 11 months. I appreciate that, but my decision is final. I'll complete any urgent projects during my notice period and ensure a smooth transition for Kevin. Harold's face had gone pale. David, you can't just leave. You know our systems better than anyone. The adaptive learning project, the new client presentations dash. Kevin mentioned that my work was foundational but lacked commercial viability. I'm sure he'll develop something much more innovative. The next 10 days passed in a strange atmosphere of barely controlled panic. Word of my resignation had spread through the engineering department, triggering exactly the exodus Janet had predicted. Marcus accepted a position with Boston Dynamics. Lisa Park was in final interviews with Tesla. Even some of the junior engineers were fielding calls from recruiters. Kevin's confidence began to crack as he realized the scope of knowledge walking out the door. He scheduled increasingly frequent meetings with me, desperately trying to download 12 years of experience into his MBA-trained brain. David, the adaptive learning code. Can you document the core algorithms before you leave? Kevin's request came during what would be my final week. Kevin, those algorithms are proprietary to my personal research. Meridian has access to the foundational concepts, but the advanced implementations were developed on my own time. His face went white. What do you mean, your personal research? I've been developing parallel innovations independently for the past 3 years. Similar to Meridian's projects, but improved and enhanced using my own resources. Kevin stared at me across the conference table. You can't do that. There's a non-compete clause dash, which applies to direct competition, not independent research. I've been careful to ensure compliance with all legal requirements. That afternoon, Harold called me into his office again. This time, Jennifer Walsh was present via video conference, and Harold's corporate attorney, Richard Sterling, sat beside his desk looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "David," Harold began, his voice tight with controlled anger, "Richard has some concerns about your departure and potential intellectual property issues." Richard cleared his throat. "Mr. Chen, we need to ensure that any knowledge you've gained during your employment remains with Meridian Technologies. The non-compete clause in your contract doesn't apply to innovations I've developed independently," I finished. "Jennifer has reviewed all relevant documentation. Everything I'm taking with me was created using my own time, resources, and equipment." Jennifer's voice came through the video conference speakers with professional clarity. "Gentlemen, Mr. Chen has been meticulous about maintaining separation between his Meridian work and his personal research. All patent applications were filed individually, funded personally, and developed outside company time." Harold leaned forward. "What patent applications?" 17 applications covering advanced robotics, AI integration, and adaptive learning systems, Jennifer replied. "Several have already been approved, and we're in discussions with major manufacturers regarding licensing agreements." The room fell completely silent. Richard Sterling was frantically taking notes. Harold's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Harold," I said quietly, "you told me family comes first. I've decided to make my career my family." My last day at Meridian Technologies was surprisingly quiet. I cleaned out the final items from my desk, returned my security badge, and said goodbye to the colleagues who remained. Kevin wasn't in the office. Harold had sent him to an emergency business development seminar, probably hoping a few days of intensive training could somehow make up for years of missing experience. As I walked toward the exit carrying my small box of personal items, Harold appeared in the lobby. "David, wait." His voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before. "Can we talk about this reasonably? What would it take for you to stay?" I turned to face him, this man who'd built his company on my innovations and then dismissed me as adequate. "Harold, 3 weeks ago you had the chance to make a different choice. You chose family over merit. I'm simply choosing myself over loyalty. The patents, we can work out some kind of arrangement. Shared licensing, revenue splits. The patents are already committed. My new partners appreciate the value of innovation-driven leadership." Harold's shoulders sagged. "New partners?" "Tesla's manufacturing division, Boston Dynamics, and General Electric. They're very interested in adaptive learning systems and AI-integrated robotics, especially systems that are significantly more advanced than anything currently available." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Harold, Kevin might want to focus on those blockchain applications he mentioned. The traditional robotics market is about to become much more competitive." 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office at Quantum Dynamics, the startup I'd co-founded with venture capital backing and partnerships with 3 Fortune 500 companies. The adaptive learning patents had generated $12 million in licensing fees in the first quarter alone. My team of 15 engineers, including Marcus, Lisa, and several other Meridian refugees, was developing technology that made my old company's offerings look primitive. The news about Meridian Technologies arrived via a text from Janet Morrison, who'd become quality assurance director at a medical device company. "Thought you'd want to know Meridian just laid off 30% of their engineering staff. Kevin's been demoted to business development. Harold's looking for a buyer." I set down my phone and returned to reviewing patent applications for our next-generation manufacturing system. Through my office window I could see the Boston skyline, the city where I'd finally found a place that valued innovation over politics, merit over nepotism. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply being excellent at what you do, and letting the people who underestimated you discover what they've lost when it's too late to matter. Harold had taught me that family comes first. He just never realized that I'd make my work my family and my patents my legacy. The nephew he'd promoted over me lasted 8 months before being quietly reassigned to handling vendor relationships. The company he'd built on my innovations was now struggling to compete with technology I'd developed in my spare time. As I signed the final documents for our Series B funding round, $40 million to expand our manufacturing AI division, I thought about that conversation in Harold's office. "Family first," he'd said, dismissing 12 years of dedication with a shrug.